and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today I have a very exciting project for you guys. I promised more upcycling on my channel this year, and this is the first project we're going to do right out of the gate. For this upcycle project, I'm going to take this sheet. I picked this up at an estate sale. It was with all the linens. I think it's from the 1930s or 40s. It's this nice rayon. It's not like splitting, like it's still in good condition. I bought it with a bedspread that was completely split, and it's this really beautiful peach color. And then the reason I'm putting this out near Valentine's Day is it has little cupids as lace. I'm sure I'll have to give you guys a close-up for you to see that. Hold up. Aren't these cute? The second I saw this sheet, I knew I wanted to upcycle it into either a blouse or a dress. I need to do it into a blouse because there is not enough fabric here for a dress, but I think I'll have enough lace left over for another item at some point if I decide to go that way. Wow, I'm looking at how they did the corner. They patched that together so smoothly. But yeah, I'm really excited. This might be like a bedspread. I don't totally know. But either way, it's really cute. I like this color. I think it's like, I don't know, I just think this is gonna be really, really nice, and I'm very excited. For the pattern for this upcycle, I'm doing Mccall's 5730, and I am doing option B. I'll have it up closer so you guys can actually see. So basically, this is the perfect blouse because it has like puffy sleeves. It's very romantic. It has pin tuck, and then it also has this V of lace that's like meant to be like a cutout, as well as some on the sleeves, and I think this will work perfectly for this. And I have just enough fabric to do it in theory. So yeah, I'm really excited about this one, and I'm really excited to use this sheet. I've had this sheet for I think a little over a year now, and I just couldn't decide what to do with it, and I wanted to make sure I was a good enough seamstress to not like ruin everything, and now I think I'm at that point. So with that, let's go ahead. First, I actually have to unpick everything in here to salvage as much fabric as I can. And then after that, we will go ahead and jump into the cutting. But yes, first we will be jumping into the getting this pulled apart. So we're starting out this video a little bit different because this is upcycling. I have to pick out all these stitches. So because this was made probably somewhere between the 20s and the 40s, these stitches are tiny. Something that you might not know is we actually use longer stitches now in machines, especially on mass-produced items, than we did back then. Back then, quality was more important. Now, with the production times that seamstresses are given, it is faster to do a longer stitch than to do a tiny stitch. I would bet these are like 2 millimeters, maybe even smaller. As a result of these being so tiny and tight and using high quality thread, these were a pain to pick out. So my method was kind of to pick out two ends and then use my tweezers to grab the end and actually pull it through. This is what I found I could do the most with without like my hands hurting. This took me 5 hours over multiple days because of how hard it was on my hands. I had to stop multiple times because of pain and numbness and other weird chronic nonsense that I deal with. So this was definitely very high effort, and I think that's something to keep in mind when upcycling. Upcycling does take more effort than buying fabric and making something. If I just bought this fabric and this trim, I could have taken 5 hours off of the whole making time of this. The whole point of this is to show you how I do upcycle when I upcycle, so of course we are going to continue on despite my hurting hands. Another thing to think about when upcycling is placement of pattern. I looked out and my pattern fit on all the different things. This is the narrower. There was one wide piece and two narrowers. This is one of the narrowers, and luckily one of my bodice pieces fit perfectly on it. Otherwise, I would have had to do some piecing. Piecing work is really common when upcycling because sometimes you just don't have enough of the fabric in exactly the right circumstances to actually cut the pattern. I do know I want to French seam all the seams, so I am cutting these with an extra 1/2 inch for those French seams. I am also erring on wanting to make this pattern a little bit bigger. I think it might be a little tight in the arms because 70s patterns usually are for me. So here I am actually cutting a full inch to give me an extra 2 inches across the whole garment, because remember it's across 4 and it's 1/2 inch add. We're giving myself an extra full inch here, and that is why you see me cutting so far away from the piece. This was my wider piece of fabric, which I am doing the front of the bodice and the sleeve. These were easy enough. This pattern actually worked really, really well for an upcycle project because there's also some piecing within. And now we are doing our final small pieces, and then here you're gonna also see me add a bit to the cuffs. I measured around my arm and I added an inch for ease because because I really don't like sleeves or sleeve cuffs that are way too tight. I find them very uncomfortable, and I would rather have them be too loose. Even though it's like less aesthetic, it will fit me better and it'll be more comfortable for me, and I'll get more use out of the piece. And now we're sewing. Right out of the gate, they had me tackle the thing that I feared the most, which was those tiny, tiny, tiny pin tucks up at the front, or pleats, or whatever you want to call them. They wanted you to stitch these at 1/16th, which is just wild. I think mine ended up being somewhere between 1/16th and 1/8 of an inch, because 1/16th is so small. Because this is a floppy rayon, I was concerned about it being sturdy enough to hold up to the needle and not get like pushed down into my machine. So I sewed it over a piece of just like normal paper to give it that sturdiness so I could actually get that straight line. This worked rather well. Basically, I sewed it with the paper under it, and then afterwards the needle has made all those perforations in the paper, and so I'm just kind of ripping that down the middle, and then it takes the paper out of the stitching. So that was my method here. It worked pretty well for me. Definitely would recommend for really, really, really small pleat tucks in rayon if you are wild enough to choose to attempt this. With the paper, it was doable. I would recommend. It was not as much of a nightmare as I feared. And here I am also pressing the pleats down. I first tried from the front and it was a disaster, so I turned it over to the back and actually stretched out each little like in between line thing. When I did it for the front, a lot of things like folded over and did weird things, so definitely do from the back and carefully. Don't be like me. Actually, I think best would have been to sew one and press it and sew one and press it, which is what I do later on the sleeves. Spoiler alert. And next up, I am working with what I bought this pattern for, actually. So this lace is about 1/4 inch wider than the pattern recommends. They wanted 2-inch wide lace. My lace was 2 1/4 inch wide, so I just kind of approximated, and here I am drawing. Basically, there's lines on the pattern. This cupid lace is what inspired me to buy this piece, so I'm really excited to have it right front and center on the blouse. And then the lines that I'm drawing here are to make the V shape that will mimic the bodice. So once you sew these down, it will actually make a V. That's quite smart. And here I am sewing that down. I had to switch my thread color just for this, which switching out thread is never fun. So here I am just pressing that, and then I am laying these pieces to see if I got the angle of this right and if I know what I'm doing and if this all makes sense. So far it's looking pretty okay. I did have to kind of adjust the bottom piece. It's definitely not quite exactly on the angle. However, I also think because there's no darts in this, I think that it being on kind of a modified angle actually helps maybe put a little fullness in the bust. So I think I did this right. And then I stitched this down again with the white thread, and then I am just pressing the raw edge up here. I thought I could double fold it maybe, but that looked like it was going to be awkward and bulky, so I ended up just folding it up completely. And then I quickly trimmed that edge after folding it and figured I would figure it out after I sewed in the bottom, which is what I am pinning here. I never actually showed you how I finished these here, but basically what I did is I just top stitched that edge down and then I trimmed it even closer. This was cut on the bias, so it's actually not fraying too bad. We'll see if that's true in the future. This is also old fabric, so it just might not fray that bad at all because it's like a really, really tight, like high quality rayon that you just don't see anymore. That's what I'm hoping, at least. And then it's getting fairly late in the day, and so my main goal today is just to get the front and the back done separately. So here I am working on the back. I am sewing in the back seam, figuring out the French seam, all that jazz, so that way I can then put in the zipper. So here I just put in some interfacing tape to like make the edge by the zipper sturdier, and obviously since it's double-sided, it's then like stuck down in that very, very crisp edge. And then I sew close to the zipper up one way, and then down on the other side I do a placket where I am sewing a little bit away from the zipper. This works the best for me. I also wasn't sure how I was going to feel about a zipper on the back of this shirt, but I actually really like it. But with that, we are wrapping up what we're doing today, and I will check in with y'all tomorrow. All right, good afternoon. It is 1:30 and I'm about to start sewing for the day. I had a bit of a delay because I went to the market, and look at the little sweater I got for Spooky. Yeah, aren't you cute, baby? Sorry, this is probably tampering my microphone, but look at it. Look at how cute she is. I'm going to take her out of it very soon. It was a big distraction. She's clearly very mad at me, which I deserve, but I wanted to show you her in her little sweater. I will not be putting her in her sweater often because I think it's kind of rude. If she shows you this side, It has a little sunshine on it because she's my little sunshine baby, and it also has a chicken and a frog and other cute animals, but I'm going to take it off her. I'm going to free her. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about sewing. Okay, go on. Yeah, you are okay now. Oh, sorry. But look at how cute this is. So cute. Anyway, enough about Spooky's sweater. We're talking about the sewing today. So yesterday I cut out everything and then I finished the like front part, which has this like beautiful V and all these little pin tucks. I'm quite pleased with this. I was very, very, very nervous about the pin tucks. So having them turn out this successful is really exciting for me. And yeah, this just looks really beautiful and I can't wait to finish it, I guess. And then this is the back that I also finished. It just has the zipper down the back. But today the goal is to put those together and then put the collar and the sleeves on. I think that's all pretty doable today. So fingers crossed I can get through it since I did start at 1:30, which is a little bit late. But we're just gonna go ahead. Baby. Yeah, we don't need to do that. Oh, thank you for still loving me. I love you too. I appreciate that Spooky has forgiven me for putting her in that sweater. Thank you. Okay, now let's go ahead and it does not look like she forgave me. Why are you so mad? But yeah, let's go ahead and hop into the sewing. Here I am pressing the side seams for a French seam. I remembered to do it for the sides, but I forgot to do it for the top shoulder seams. When I forget to cut for French seams, what I do is I cut strips of bias from the scrap fabric and I go ahead and bias bind it. It would obviously be more efficient to French seam it. It would be less bulky and use less fabric and take less time. But when you forget, you kind of have to improvise, and this is the way I do it. And I mean, if you look closely, you can obviously tell the difference between a French seam and a bound seam, but this does the trick well enough from a distance and just in general. And then here I'm doing a double turn hem. I do my double turn hems by first folding it over and stitching it around once and then folding it over again and stitching it again. This is just the way I do it. It's the way that works best for me. Do what works best for you. But this is simple and I just wanted to get the hemming done with. I don't enjoy the hemming, and a lot of times for dresses I won't do a double turn hem like this, but for shirts, because I know I'll be tucking in the blouse, I don't want to put in the time to hand seam the hem. So I had added in that extra space on the back as well as on the side seams, and I realized I forgot to add it to the collar, which is obviously important. So I real quick pieced some things together and I'm just adding a 1/2 inch. This is why you see the pattern back and you see me cutting here, is because I just needed to make it a little bit wider so that way it would fit and work for the blouse. And I also don't mind a wider neck because it is definitely more comfy. So for the collar, it's going to have the lace sticking out the top. So first you seam in the lace. I'm just basting this in a 1/2 inch or 5/8, whatever the pattern calls for, facing inwards, because then we're going to sandwich the other one on top of it. And then when you flip it out, you want it sticking out top. If you sew this down the other way, your nice part of the lace will not be stuck in the seam. It will instead be stuck inside the collar. So even though it seems counterintuitive, you put in the lace down and inside of where you're going to flip it out. And here I am making that sandwich. I do wish I curved the lace down to the side seams as well. I just think it would have got me cleaner corners. However, I didn't do that and I'm just making the sandwich. And now here I am sewing the seam, and because I basted it in the lace, I can see where the lace is and I can make sure my seam follows where the lace is, so I know I'm catching exactly the right amount of lace. And then I am turning that inside out and it is looking beautiful. And then here we are pinning down one side of the collar to the neckline, and we are matching dots and we are matching notches here. The dots are at the shoulder seams and then the notches are throughout the rest of it. I did overcorrect a little bit, but that's okay because then I can get some overlap in the back and use a hook and eye, so no big deal. And then I am just sewing that down. I sew this with the collar side up to make sure I don't catch the other side of the collar. It's a really easy mistake to make. And then I am turning the edge of the other side of the collar over. I will hand stitch this in place, but I am pressing it first so it'll be nice and clean. And here is the hand stitching. This was a pretty nice fabric as far as how much it was like hard to get the needle through. The needle went through with ease and it didn't hurt my hands very much. Next, I have moved on to the sleeves. I am not gonna lie, I was a little bit scared of the sleeves. What I'm doing first is I'm marking each side with my pen of where the lace is gonna go. So the reason I didn't mark all these lines at once, even though it would have been easier in theory, is I know my lace is 1/4 of an inch longer than they expected. And so I want to get my lace in first, and then I'll actually measure from the lace to put in the lines for the pleats. So here I'm just putting in that first line for the lace. I also didn't put in both lines for the lace because I knew it would overhang by about 1/4 inch. So here I'm just ready to stitch the top. And then I'm stitching this down because I'm top stitching the lace. I am making sure to use matching thread to the lace and not to the fabric. So we are using a cream thread here instead of a pink. This is just the extra type of detail that really makes a project great. And even though it's annoying and I hate changing my thread machine, it's definitely worth it. Now that the lace is stitched down, I am measuring to put in the lines for the little tiny pleats. This also works great because if the lace is a little bit crooked, all of the lines will follow that little bit of crookedness, and in theory it will all look a little bit less crooked. And then after drawing these lines, I am cutting down the middle for this lace insert. This made me a little bit nervous, I am not gonna lie, because cutting something like this is just a little bit nerve-wracking. I did it, and then I pressed it, and then after I pressed it, I went ahead and trimmed it a lot closer so it wasn't so long of an overhang. And then I stitched on the top of the lace again to stitch down that fold. This got me as close as I was going to get to a clean finished edge. I couldn't figure out how to make like folding it within itself work well and not get bulky and weird and require like another line of stitching that would be seen. So this is what worked for me. And then I am back to using the paper trick to make these tiny tucks. So the biggest difference between this paper trick and the collar is the collar was easily smaller than one full sheet of paper. This one needed 3 sheets of paper to be able to get the same effect. So basically when I get to the end of a piece of paper, I am then kind of inserting another piece of paper, and there's a little bit of overlap where there's 2 pieces of paper, but it all still ripped out just fine and exactly the same. And having learned from my last mistake, I am ironing these all down right after I stitch them instead of doing all of them at once. This definitely helped with the neatness of the seams and weirdly enough reduced time, I feel like, because I didn't have to fix all my wonky ironing. This project was quite time intensive, so we are now on a different day, and the first thing that I'm doing is I'm doing the French seaming for the sleeves. This is another tricky part where I have a French seam going into kind of like an open seam, similar to a zipper. So I am not French seaming that very end. I'm in fact cutting it to separate it. And then I'm folding it over twice so it has a nice clean seam. And then I am pulling out the basting that I put in to get that really, really nice press. While I'm at the iron, I am also putting in this fusible interfacing to the cuffs. This just gives them a little extra structure. The instructions didn't call for them, but I've learned that I like my cuffs to have just a little bit more oomph to them than they would without the interfacing. And then I am hand sewing the opening of the sleeve down. On the dress that I'm actually wearing right now, I did this with machine and I just didn't like how it turned out. I definitely think it turns better as hand sewing. And what's funny is this dress was a pattern from the 1940s that told you to machine stitch it, and then this was a 1970s pattern that told you to hand stitch it. And I just think that's interesting because usually the 70s has you machine stitch anything you can. You know, just a fun little tidbit from my nerd brain. And with that stitch down, I am now putting in the gathering stitches for the cuff since these will be puffy sleeves. While at the machine, I am also basting in the lace for the cuffs the same way I did the collar, except for this time I am putting in that corner because I learned from the collar. And then we're doing that same lace and fabric sandwich as we did for the collar and stitching it essentially the exact same way. I did disobey the pattern actually a little bit here because the pattern actually had you top stitch down the cuffs, and I wanted to instead do the stitching on the inside by hand because I just think it looks nicer. So here I am turning these inside out and pressing them, or right side out, not inside out. And then here I'm gathering the sleeve down to the cuff. This is different than the neck because the neck I didn't need to gather it. I just followed all of the notches and stuff. Here I am following notches as well as gathering. And just like before, I am stitching this down with just one side of the cuff, pulling out the gathering stitches, and then turning over the cuffs and pressing for eventual hand stitching on the inside. And then here I am hand stitching that in. I guess I sat on the couch for this, which is a dangerous choice. Sometimes I sit on the couch and I don't get back up again to finish a project, but here we avoided that. With all that sleeve stuff done, I am now ready to actually set the sleeve into the blouse. So we're getting pretty close to the end. I'm getting very excited. Here, I'm just gathering it in. These actually aren't quite as gathered or puffy as you might think. It just definitely, you always notice when you actually go to set in the sleeve. And then after this, there's actually not much hand stitching to do. I'm just putting in some snaps on the cuffs, which is what the instructions say to do. I went back and forth on whether I wanted it to be a snaps or be a button. And then the last touch, because I'm a little bit nerdy and also a little bit sentimental, is I re-sewed the tag in from the original sheet. I do have tags that are mine to use, and I debated stitching in both, but it felt like too much. And so I just went ahead and stitched in the original tag. And honestly, this makes me really happy because it feels like a full transformation of the garment, and like it begins where it ends, kind of. It just felt very satisfying for me. But with that, we're gonna go ahead and jump into the reveal. All right, you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I think this top is super cool, but before we get into my final thoughts on this project, let's talk our cost breakdown. So the fabric for this was that sheet, which I bought for $5 at that estate sale, which I actually think is a pretty good price for a sheet that is that old. I don't know that I would normally expect to pay that, but they were just trying to move things because it was the last day of the estate sale. Notions, I only spent $4 on, so it was just the zipper and the thread. Everything else was just there. And then the lace came from the bedspread. The other lace I had in my stash, I guess I probably should add something there. So let's say, well, I probably got it at Seattle Creative for a couple dollars. So let's say instead that notions are $6. That seems about right. And then the pattern was only $8. I picked this up at an estate sale where they were only $8. So that is where this pattern came from. I think it worked super well. So that brings us to a total in supplies of $19. This is a very cheap project for me. If you've been following this channel, you know I tend to usually spend more. I think it was just as cheap because it was an upcycle, and again, because I found the sheet at an estate sale. Normally I kind of did a like perusal. These sheets seem to be going for like $40 on Etsy, so I do think this is in theory cheaper, and I also think something with cupid lace would probably go for more money because it's like not that common. But yeah, $19 for this shirt, I am more than happy to have spent that. As for the labor, we spent 5 hours unpicking everything, and then 3 hours cutting it, and then 6.5 actually putting it together. That brings us to an hour's total of 14.5 hours. This time I am actually going to be multiplying this total for labor by 32.70. I arrived by that number. I finally found a place that broke down what middle class in Seattle is. I believe a living wage is middle class. I don't think you should be living in poverty. I don't think that's a living wage. And I found that $68,000 a year is living wage in Seattle. That actually sounds about right. That sounds like the amount of money. When I started earning close to that amount of money, it was like the first time living here that I was able to like not stress about money all the time. So because of that, I think that is a pretty accurate. So multiplying that 14.5 by 32.70, we get to a labor total of $474.15. While I might have saved money in supplies by using a bed sheet, I then cost more on labor because I had to spend 5 hours picking that apart, as opposed to fabric if I was to just buy that fabric and it was just exist, right? Also, to just kind of go a little further on why I want like why I talk about like middle class being a living wage. I just think if you work 40 hours a week, you should make enough to live on and live like, I'm not talking like rich comfortably, but like comfortably enough that you can live by yourself, go out to eat occasionally, and be able to save money. I think that is like a basic standard of living. And I guess like buy yourself healthcare. I think that's like what I would consider a basic standard living. For like kind of reference on how expensive Seattle is, I recently saw a study that says you have to make over $200K a year in Seattle to afford a home, which like obviously $68K is not affording a home. So I don't know. I also kind of think for a living wage you should be able to own a home, but I also know that Seattle is kind of nuts and bananas on the real estate front. So I'm not gonna factor in what you need to buy a home because I don't make $200K, hence why I am here renting. Anyway, we have gone over that. So that is the cost breakdown. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I always like sharing that because I hope it makes us think about who makes our garments and how much they're getting paid. This is the piece itself. Isn't this cool? So I'm so happy with how this turned out. I'm actually really glad. Back when I bought the sheet, I wasn't as good of a sewer. And so I'm actually really glad that I waited because you don't just find 1940s sheets anywhere and everywhere. So I'm glad I waited until I was more experienced. I think even just a couple months ago, I couldn't have done this well. As far as negatives, I need to show you the inside to talk about the bad things before I end with all the good things. I only have one thing that I would kind of criticize myself on. The inside isn't as clean. I could not figure out how to finish the seams that go up against the lace, like the, what's that called? It's not lace edging. Insert. I don't feel like I got these as clean as I want. I wanted to like double fold them over, but I couldn't figure out how to do that and not have like a line of ugly stitching. So they are raw, which is not ideal. However, I think it will be okay because this rayon is a really tight weave, so it's like not fraying. Otherwise, I finished everything else with French seams. Everything else looks really nice and clean. Then on the back where the zipper is, I used the finished edge of the sheet to do this, so that way my zipper edges were also clean. So I think I did, yeah, a really clean and awesome job with this. I think this is stunning. I think I love the insert lace. This was a great project to learn on because of the way the pattern like tells you how to do it. So now I could definitely put like lace inserts almost on anything I want. So that's an exciting skill to have picked up. And then also these like little tiny pin tucks. I didn't know I was capable of doing these tiny pin tucks, so I'm pretty excited about it. I was super nervous about these. These were the part of the project I was most nervous about. And I think I accomplished them really well. And I think they look amazing. And I'm just really proud of myself on this project. I pretty much wouldn't change anything. I do think it could fit a little bit better on the shoulders than it does right now, but I'm okay with it because I will say I wore this to work today and it was so comfy. I didn't really I knew I was wearing a shirt, but I feel like I didn't notice it all day. It wasn't like an annoying thing to wear, and because of the extra space I added in it, I didn't, which I think is what impacted the fit, but as a result I didn't have any tightness or tension, which was perfect. I'm really happy with this. I think it's super amazing and I'm just proud of myself. It's been, yeah, the past few months have been, I think, my favorite few months of sewing because I just feel like I can kind of do anything. That wraps us up. As always, you can support me by buying me a coffee over on Ko-fi. I always really appreciate it. And then comments and liking this video or giving it that thumbs up always help me out in the almighty algorithm, so I appreciate that. And of course, if you are new here, definitely subscribe and stick around. I have a lot of really cool vintage sewing projects as well as new and other upcycle projects coming up, so definitely stay tuned for that. And I will see you next time. Bye!